Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I was about to cancel my dream honeymoon to pay for my brother's medical bills until I uncovered a lie so big it shook my entire family to its core. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was knee-deep in honeymoon plans. My fiancé, Jake, and I had been dreaming about this trip for months, a once-in-a-lifetime getaway to Greece. I was picking out excursions when my phone rang. It was my mom. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" I greeted her, expecting the usual casual check-in. Instead, her voice cracked. "It's your brother," she said, her tone frantic. "He's been in a terrible accident." The words hit me like a freight train. I froze, clutching the phone. "What kind of accident? Is he okay? Where is he?" She started rattling off vague details, something about him being hit by a car while crossing the street. She said he was alive but badly injured, and the hospital bills were already piling up. "We need your help," she said. "The costs are overwhelming." I blinked in disbelief. "Why can't you guys cover it? What about insurance?" Mom sighed, frustration creeping into her voice. "Your father's retirement fund is already stretched thin. The insurance only covers part of it. We don't have enough to keep him afloat, and we don't have time to wait." The guilt hit me immediately. Family had always been a cornerstone of how I was raised. Mom didn't even have to say it. I knew what she was hinting at. I hesitated. "Mom, Jake and I just finished saving for our honeymoon. We put everything into it." There was a pause. Then her tone shifted, becoming sharp. "So what? Your trip is more important than your brother's life? Is that what you're saying?" "No, of course not," I stammered, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. She softened, sensing my hesitation. "We need you right now. Your brother needs you. Your family. I know you'll do the right thing." After hanging up, I sat there, my mind spinning. I couldn't shake the image of my brother lying in a hospital bed, tubes and monitors everywhere, struggling to survive. How could I even think about sipping cocktails on a beach while he was in that condition? That night, I broke the news to Jake. We were sitting on the couch, a mix of excitement and exhaustion from weeks of planning. I looked at him and felt a pang of guilt. "Babe, we might need to cancel the honeymoon," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake set down his glass of wine, his face immediately clouded with concern. "Cancel? Why? What happened?" I explained the situation, every word feeling heavier than the last. Jake listened quietly, nodding occasionally, but I could see the frustration building. When I finished, he leaned back with a sigh. "This is a lot," he said carefully. "I get it. It's your brother. But canceling the honeymoon? We've worked so hard for this trip." "I know," I said quickly, tears welling up. "But what choice do we have? My mom says they can't afford the bills. If we don't help, what happens to him?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, clearly torn. "Look, I love you, and if this is what we have to do, I'll support you. But something about this feels rushed. Don't you think it's weird they didn't ask for help sooner?" I hadn't thought about it like that. At the time, I was too consumed by guilt to question anything. "Maybe," I admitted, "but I don't think they're lying." "Why would they?" He didn't argue, just pulled me into a hug. "Let's sleep on it, okay? We'll figure it out together." That night, I barely slept. My dreams were a jumble of happy moments with my brother, mixed with haunting images of hospital rooms and mounting bills. By morning, I felt drained but resolute. I called the travel agency first thing to inquire about cancellations. The agent was understanding, but warned me about the penalties and non-refundable deposits. My heart sank as I realized how much money we'd lose, but I told her I'd confirm later that day. When I called my mom to tell her I was leaning toward canceling, she didn't even hesitate. "Thank you," she said, her tone full of relief. "I knew you'd come through." But instead of feeling reassured, her words left me with a strange sense of unease. I pushed the thought away, telling myself I was just overthinking. After all, family came first. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a tangled web of lies that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The morning after my restless night, I woke up early with a knot in my stomach. I stared at my phone for what felt like an eternity before finally calling the travel agency. My voice trembled as I explained that I needed to cancel our honeymoon plans. The agent on the other end was patient and understanding, but I could hear the pity in her tone. "We'll do what we can to minimize the penalties," she said gently, "but because your trip is so close, there's not much we can refund." Hearing the numbers felt like a punch to the gut. 2 years of saving, budgeting, and dreaming, all gone in an instant. I thanked her and hung up, staring blankly at my phone for a few moments. It felt like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I called my mom right after to let her know. "I'm canceling the honeymoon," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause before she finally said, "Good. Now we can keep him alive." Her words stung, not because I wanted gratitude, but because it felt like I had just handed over the last piece of my happiness, and all she could muster was that cold, clinical response. "I'm glad I can help," I said quietly, swallowing the lump in my throat. I tried to shift the conversation to my brother. "How's he doing? Is he awake? Can I talk to him?" "He's not in any condition to talk," she said quickly. "He's been in and out of consciousness, and the pain meds make him loopy. It's better to let him rest." "Mom, can you just tell me what exactly happened to him?" I pressed. "The accident, the injuries, something—" Her tone turned sharp. "I already told you. He got hit by a car. His leg's broken. He's got internal injuries. It's bad. Why are you asking so many questions?" "I'm not trying to interrogate you," I said, taken aback. "I just want to understand what's going on. He's my brother." She softened slightly, but still sounded evasive. "It's hard to explain over the phone. Just trust me when I say he's lucky to even be alive." I let it go, convincing myself she was just stressed and overwhelmed. Still, there was something in her voice, an edge I couldn't quite place. I chalked it up to the pressure she must be under, trying to keep everything together while her son was fighting for his life. Later that evening, Jake came home to find me sitting on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. He sat down next to me, and I could feel his eyes on me. "Did you cancel it?" he asked softly. I nodded. "It's done. They can't refund much, but at least it's one less thing to worry about." Jake reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "Are you okay?" I shook my head, feeling tears welling up. "I just feel like I'm losing everything. We worked so hard for that trip, and now it's gone. And my mom, she's acting so strange. She won't give me a straight answer about anything." Jake frowned. "What do you mean, strange?" "She won't let me talk to my brother. She keeps saying he's too out of it, but wouldn't he at least be able to pick up the phone for a second? And every time I ask for details about the accident, she shuts me down." Jake leaned back, his brows furrowed. "That doesn't make sense. If it's that serious, wouldn't she want you to know everything?" "I don't know," I said, my voice cracking. "Maybe she's just trying to protect me from the worst of it. Or maybe I'm overthinking everything." Jake hesitated before saying, "It just feels off. Don't you think you should push for more answers? If something doesn't feel right, you should trust your gut." I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't sure what my gut was telling me. All I knew was that I felt hollow, like I was being pulled in a dozen directions with no idea which way was up. The following morning, I decided to call the hospital directly. I wanted to hear from a nurse or doctor, someone who could give me a clearer picture of my brother's condition. After navigating through a maze of automated menus, I finally reached someone. "Hi, I'm calling about a patient," I said, giving my brother's name. "He was admitted a few days ago after an accident." There was a pause on the other end. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said, "but we don't have anyone by that name here." My heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure? Maybe he's under a different name? Or transferred to another facility?" "No, I've checked our records. There's no one by that name admitted here, past or present." I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Maybe my mom had taken him to another hospital and just forgot to tell me? But that didn't make sense. Why would she be so vague about his condition, if that were the case? I decided to call my mom again. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Which hospital is he at?" I tried calling one, but they said he wasn't there. There was a long pause. "Oh, they must have gotten confused," she said quickly. "He was transferred to a private facility. They're taking better care of him there." "Which one?" I asked. "I'll text you the details later," she said dismissively. "I'm in the middle of something right now." The unease I'd been trying to suppress came roaring back. Something was definitely wrong. That night, I told Jake what had happened. He listened quietly, his face growing darker with every word. "This doesn't add up," he said when I finished. "Why would she keep dodging your questions? And why wouldn't the hospital have a record of him?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm starting to feel like there's something she's not telling me." Jake nodded. "You need to get to the bottom of this. If they're asking you to give up everything, you deserve to know exactly why." He was right. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I got them. The unease that had been gnawing at me grew stronger with each passing day. Every time I called my mom, she brushed me off, assuring me my brother was hanging in there but still too weak to talk. I wanted to believe her, but the inconsistencies were piling up. "Mom, can you at least put the phone near him so I can say something? He doesn't even have to reply," I suggested one evening. She sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that screamed frustration. He's not in a state to hear anything right now, honey. The doctors say he needs complete rest. The pain meds make him so groggy, he won't even understand what you're saying. Maybe I could visit him instead? I offered hesitantly. I could drive over this weekend. No. The sharpness in her voice startled me. She quickly softened her tone. I mean, it's not a good idea right now. You'll only upset him. Let him rest, okay? I'll let you know when he's ready for visitors. I tried to tell myself she was just stressed, that she was trying to protect me from seeing my brother in a vulnerable state. But something about her demeanor left me feeling hollow. A few days later, I decided to reach out to Sarah, a family friend who worked at the hospital where my mom said my brother was admitted. Sarah had always been warm and helpful, the kind of person you could rely on to tell it like it was. When I called her, she greeted me cheerfully. Hey, it's been ages. What's going on? I cut straight to the point. Sarah, I need your help. My mom said my brother's at your hospital after an accident. I just wanted to check in on him and see how he's doing. There was a pause on the other end. Wait, your brother? What happened to him? I quickly explained the story, giving her my brother's name and the timeline of events. As I spoke, her tone shifted from curious to concerned. I haven't seen him here, she said finally. I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. Are you sure? He was admitted a few days ago. My mom said it was a bad accident. Maybe he's in a different ward. I'd know if he was here, Sarah replied firmly. It's not a big hospital, and I check the admission logs daily. He's not here. My stomach twisted. Could he have been transferred somewhere else? It's possible, she said, but her voice was uncertain. Still, if he was admitted here first, there'd be a record of it. Let me double-check and get back to you. I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling. The knot in my stomach had grown into a full-blown storm. Later that evening, Sarah called back. Hey, I checked everywhere, admissions, transfers, even ER records. Your brother's name isn't anywhere in our system. Are you sure this is the right hospital? I swallowed hard. That's what my mom told me. I don't know what to think anymore. Sarah hesitated before saying, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but you might want to ask your mom some direct questions. Something isn't adding up. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone. My head was spinning. Why would my mom lie about something so serious? What was going on? I decided to confront her directly. I called her immediately, my heart pounding. Mom, I need to talk to you, I began, trying to keep my voice calm. I spoke to Sarah. She works at the hospital where you said my brother is admitted, and she couldn't find any record of him. What's going on? There was a long pause. Too long. Then she let out a nervous laugh. Oh, Sarah must have missed it. He was transferred to a private facility shortly after he was admitted. They're better equipped to handle his condition. Which facility? I pressed. I'll text you the details later, she said quickly. I can't talk right now. I'm in the middle of something. Mom, this doesn't make sense, I said, my frustration bubbling over. Why didn't you tell me he was transferred? Why haven't I been able to talk to him? Why is everything so vague? You need to stop stressing yourself out, she snapped. I'm handling everything. Trust me, he's being taken care of. Just focus on your own life. Okay. Her words did nothing to calm me. In fact, they only made me more suspicious. That night, I lay awake, replaying every conversation I'd had with her over the past week. The inconsistencies were glaring now. Jake noticed my restlessness and sat up beside me. You okay? He asked softly. No, I admitted, my voice trembling. Something isn't right. Mom's dodging every question, and Sarah said my brother was never even admitted to that hospital. Jake frowned. What are you going to do? I don't know, I whispered. But I can't just let this go. I need to find out the truth. Do you think your mom's lying? He asked, his tone careful. I don't want to think that, I said, tears welling up. But what other explanation is there? Why would she hide something like this from me? Jake put an arm around me, pulling me close. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out together. You don't have to deal with this alone. His words gave me a small sense of comfort, but the sinking feeling in my gut remained. Something was seriously wrong, and I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered the truth. After days of evasions and half-answers from my mom, my paranoia was at an all-time high. Jake kept urging me to wait before making any drastic decisions, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't let me rest. There were too many unanswered questions, and the inconsistencies in my mom's story were glaring. Let's hold off on officially canceling the honeymoon, Jake said over breakfast. You've already called the travel agency, but there's no harm in waiting a few more days before finalizing it. What if something's not adding up? I nodded. Even though my gut told me I wouldn't be going on that honeymoon anytime soon, I just feel so torn, I admitted. If I'm wrong and my mom is telling the truth, delaying things might mean they don't get the money they need in time. What if my brother really does need me? Jake leaned forward, his expression serious. But what if you're right? What if something's off, and you're being manipulated into giving up everything for a situation that doesn't even exist the way they're describing it? He was right, of course. I hated to think my mom could lie about something so serious, but the doubt was eating away at me. I need answers, I said finally. The next day, I decided to stop by my parents' house unannounced. I didn't tell Jake where I was going. I wanted to handle this alone. As I drove, I kept rehearsing what I'd say to my mom. I just need to see him, Mom, I imagined myself saying, even for 5 minutes. Please. When I pulled up to the house, everything looked eerily normal. The curtains were drawn, and my dad's old truck was parked in the driveway like always. But as soon as my mom opened the door, her reaction made it clear that my visit was anything but welcome. Why didn't you call first? She asked, her voice strained. She stood in the doorway, blocking my view inside. I was in the neighborhood, I lied. I wanted to check in on everyone. How's he doing? Her smile was forced. He's resting. You really shouldn't be here right now. It'll just upset him. Mom, I just want to see him for a minute, I said, trying to keep my tone calm. I'll be quiet. He doesn't even have to talk to me. He's not up for visitors, she snapped, her facade slipping for a moment. The doctor said, I won't even go near him, I interrupted, pushing past her and into the house. I just want to see for myself that he's okay. Wait, she called after me, but I was already halfway down the hall. I made a beeline for my brother's room, my heart pounding. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, my stomach dropped. The room was empty. His bed was neatly made, the way it always looked when no one was using it. His desk was untouched, and the chair was pushed in perfectly. Nothing about the room suggested someone had been living there, let alone recovering from a life-threatening injury. What's going on, Mom? I demanded, spinning around to face her. She had followed me down the hall, her face pale and tense. I told you, he's not here, she said, crossing her arms defensively. He's at the rehab facility. You said he was too weak to talk to me. I shot back. You said he needed complete rest. So why does his room look like no one's been in it for weeks? She opened her mouth to respond, but closed it again, clearly searching for an explanation. We clean it up, she said finally. He wasn't comfortable here, so we moved him to a better place where he can recover. I told you this already. No, Mom, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You told me he was transferred to a private facility, but you didn't say where. You've been dodging every question I've asked, and now his room looks like he hasn't even been here. What the hell is going on? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked back down the hall, muttering something about how I didn't understand the stress she was under. I followed her into the kitchen, refusing to let her off the hook. Mom, I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth, I said, my voice rising. Where is he? What really happened to him? I told you already, she snapped, slamming a dish onto the counter. Why can't you just trust me? I'm his mother. I know what's best for him. If you expect me to trust you, then stop lying. I shouted back, the frustration boiling over. Every time I ask you a simple question, you either dodge it or change the subject. Why won't you let me see him? Why can't you just be honest with me? Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might finally tell me the truth. But instead, she turned away, staring out the window above the sink. I'm doing the best I can, she said quietly. Then prove it, I said, my voice softening. Show me that you're telling the truth. If my brother is really in a rehab facility, give me the name. Let me visit him. I'll go right now. She didn't respond, and the silence was deafening. Eventually, I left, feeling more confused and angry than ever. On the drive home, I replayed the encounter in my head, analyzing every word, every hesitation. Nothing made sense anymore. When I got back to the apartment, Jake was waiting for me. How did it go? He asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I sank onto the couch, covering my face with my hands. His room was empty, I said, my voice muffled. It looked like no one had been in it for weeks. And when I confronted her, she just kept dodging my questions. Jake's jaw tightened. This is getting ridiculous. She's hiding something, and it's time we found out what it is. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. The first red flag had turned into a flashing neon sign, and I knew there was no turning back. I was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. After leaving my parents' house, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my gut. The empty room, my mom's defensive attitude, the way she kept dodging my questions. It was all adding up to something I couldn't ignore. That night, I decided to confront her directly again, this time over the phone. Mom, I said firmly after she answered. I need you to stop skirting around my questions. Where exactly is my brother? What's the name of the rehab facility? She sighed, exasperated. I already told you. He's at a private facility, and he's getting the care he needs. Why can't you just trust me on this? Because nothing about this makes sense. I snapped. You've been vague about everything, and when I showed up to see him, his room was completely empty. Mom, if you want me to believe you, then give me the name of the facility. I'll visit him myself. She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she might finally give me a straight answer. But then she said, he doesn't want visitors. The doctors say it'll upset his recovery. You need to respect that. That's not up to you, I shot back. If he doesn't want to see me, I'll hear it from him. Until then, I'm not letting this go. She was quiet for a long time before muttering, You're being unreasonable. Then she hung up on me. I sat there staring at my phone, my frustration boiling over. Jake, who had been listening to my side of the conversation, looked at me with concern. She's lying, I said, my voice trembling with anger. She's lying about everything. Jake nodded. I think it's time you talk to someone else who knows him. Maybe they can tell you what's really going on. That's when I remembered Mark, my brother's best friend. He and my brother had been close since high school, and if anyone would know the truth, it was him. I pulled up his number and called him without hesitation. Mark answered on the third ring, his voice cheerful. Hey, it's been a while. What's up? Hey, Mark, I said, trying to keep my tone casual despite the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. I've been trying to get in touch with my brother, but I haven't had any luck. Have you seen him recently? Yeah, I saw him yesterday, Mark said without hesitation. Why? What's going on? My heart stopped. You saw him yesterday? I repeated, barely able to keep my voice steady. Yeah, we grabbed a beer after work. He seemed fine to me. Why? Is something wrong? My mind raced. My mom had been adamant that my brother was in a rehab facility, too weak to talk, and here was Mark telling me they'd hung out like nothing was wrong. Mark, I said carefully, my mom told me he was in a terrible accident and that he's recovering in a private rehab facility. Are you sure you saw him yesterday? There was a pause. A terrible accident? Mark sounded genuinely confused. What are you talking about? He's fine. A little stressed out. Maybe, but definitely not in a rehab facility. I felt like the ground had just been pulled out from under me. Thanks, Mark, I said quickly. I'll talk to you later. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. My brother wasn't in a rehab facility. He wasn't recovering from life-threatening injuries. He was fine. My mom had been lying to me this entire time. Jake sat down beside me, his brow furrowed. What did Mark say? He saw my brother yesterday, I said flatly. They went out for drinks? Jake's eyes widened. You're kidding. So all this talk about a rehab facility was a complete lie. I finished, my voice shaking with anger. Jake put a comforting hand on my shoulder. So what do we do now? I'm going to find out why she lied, I said firmly. And I'm going to confront my brother. If he's fine, then he owes me an explanation too. Jake nodded. I'll help however I can. You don't have to do this alone. The next morning, I decided to track down my brother myself. I knew the places he frequented. Our favorite coffee shop, the gym, and of course the bar where he'd been with Mark. I started with a coffee shop, hoping to catch him before work. Sure enough, there he was, sitting by the window with a latte in hand, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. My heart raced as I approached him, anger and disbelief bubbling to the surface. Hey, I said sharply, making him look up. He blinked in surprise. Oh, hey, what are you doing here? What am I doing here? I repeated, my voice rising. What the hell are you doing here? Mom told me you were in a rehab facility recovering from a life-threatening accident. His expression froze, and for a moment, he looked genuinely panicked. I can explain, he stammered. You'd better, I snapped, crossing my arms. Because I canceled my honeymoon to pay for your supposed medical bills, and now I find out you're perfectly fine? He looked down at his coffee, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't know she told you that. He mumbled. Then what's the truth? I demanded. He sighed heavily. Look, I didn't ask her to do that, okay? She's been freaking out about money, and I guess she thought this was the only way to get you to help. I stared at him in disbelief. So you're telling me there was no accident? No hospital bills? Nothing? He nodded miserably. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know how. I left the coffee shop in a daze, my emotions swinging wildly between anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. When I got home, I told Jake everything. She lied, I said, my voice hollow. She manipulated me into canceling our honeymoon for no reason. Jake wrapped his arms around me, letting me cry into his shoulder. "You don't have to deal with this alone," he said softly. "We'll get through this together. But you need to decide how you want to handle it." "I'm confronting her," I said, wiping my tears. "I'm done letting her control me with lies. It's time she answers for what she's done." And with that, I began preparing for a showdown that I knew would change everything. After confronting my brother at the coffee shop, I couldn't shake the anger burning in my chest. His apology had been half-hearted at best, and while he admitted that our mom had lied to me, he conveniently avoided taking any responsibility for his part in the deception. That wasn't good enough. I needed more answers. That night, I called Mark again, hoping he could fill in the gaps. If my brother was fine, then where had he been during the time my mom claimed he was in the hospital? Mark was friendly as always, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice when I started asking questions. "Look," he said finally, "I don't want to get involved in your family drama. But if you're looking for him, he's been hanging out at the usual spot, Kelly's bar." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. Kelly's bar was my brother's go-to hangout spot. If Mark was right, it meant my brother had been living his normal life this entire time while I was being fed a pack of lies about his supposed recovery. That night, I decided to see for myself. I told Jake where I was going, and he offered to come with me, but I shook my head. "I need to do this alone," I said firmly. Kelly's bar was dimly lit, with a faint smell of stale beer and fried food hanging in the air. It was the kind of place that was always buzzing with laughter and the clinking of glasses, no matter the day of the week. I scanned the room quickly, my heart pounding in anticipation. And then I saw him. My brother was sitting at a table near the back, surrounded by a group of friends. He had a beer in one hand and was gesturing animatedly with the other, laughing at something one of his friends had said. He looked perfectly fine, healthy, happy, and completely carefree. There were no signs of the injuries my mom had described. No casts, no crutches, no visible scars. He wasn't hunched over in pain or struggling to move. He was just fine. I stood there frozen, torn between storming over to confront him and staying hidden. My anger was boiling over, but I knew I couldn't trust myself not to cause a scene. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and snapped a photo. The image was blurry, but it was enough. It was proof that my mom had lied, that my brother had been complicit, and that I had been manipulated into giving up my honeymoon for nothing. I left the bar without saying a word to him. The moment I stepped outside, I sent the photo to Jake with a single message. "Look at this." His response was immediate. "We need to talk to your mom. Now." I stared at the screen for a moment, my hands trembling. He was right, of course. My mom was the mastermind behind all of this, and I couldn't let her get away with it. But I needed to gather my thoughts before facing her. When I got home, Jake was waiting for me, his face a mixture of concern and anger. "He looks fine," he said, holding up his phone to show me the photo I'd sent. "Better than fine, actually. He's sitting there drinking beer like nothing's happened." "Exactly," I said, sinking into the couch. "And the worst part is, he doesn't even seem to care that Mom's been lying to me. He just brushed it off like it's no big deal." Jake sat down beside me, his expression serious. "We need to confront her. Together. She can't keep doing this to you." I nodded. "I know, but I want to go in prepared. I need to have every piece of evidence, every inconsistency lined up. If I don't, she'll just twist things around like she always does." The next day, I started putting together my case. I went through every conversation I'd had with my mom, every lie she'd told me about my brother's condition, and every detail that didn't add up. I made a list of questions I needed her to answer. Why did she tell me my brother was in a hospital when he wasn't? Why did she claim he was too weak to talk when he was out drinking with friends? What was the money really for? By the time I was finished, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control over the situation. Jake helped me rehearse what I was going to say, playing the role of my mom and throwing every excuse and deflection he could think of my way. "She's going to try to guilt you," he warned. "Don't let her. You've done nothing wrong here." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready," I said. That evening, I called my mom and told her I needed to talk to her in person. She sounded hesitant, but agreed to meet me at her house the following day. When I walked through the door, she greeted me with a strange smile. "What's this all about?" she asked, feigning innocence. "You know exactly what this is about," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the photo of my brother at the bar. "Care to explain this?" Her face went pale, and for a moment, she was speechless. But then she quickly recovered, crossing her arms defensively. "What were you doing spying on him?" she demanded. "You had no right." "I wasn't spying," I interrupted. "I was looking for answers because you refused to give me any. And now I know why." She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. Save it. I already know he's fine. Mark told me. I know he hasn't been in a rehab facility, and I know there was no accident. So why don't you tell me the real reason you lied? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might double down on her lies. But then she sighed heavily, sitting down at the kitchen table. You don't understand, she said quietly. Then make me understand, I said, my voice cold. And just like that, the web of lies she'd spun began to unravel. The drive to my parents' house felt like a battlefield in my mind. I had replayed this confrontation so many times that I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Every scenario, every possible excuse my mom might throw at me, played on an endless loop. But the photo on my phone, the undeniable proof that my brother was perfectly fine, was the weapon I needed. When I pulled up to the house, the familiar sight of the front porch, the creaky screen door, and the flower pots my mom always forgot to water felt different. It no longer felt like home. It was the stage for a betrayal I never saw coming. I stepped inside without knocking, the screen door slamming behind me. My mom was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, and she looked up with a startled expression. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice tight. We need to talk, I said firmly, holding up my phone. Her eyes flicked to it, and I watched as her face paled. What is that? She asked, already sounding defensive. This, I said, stepping closer and showing her the photo of my brother laughing with his friends at Kelly's bar, is my brother, perfectly healthy, drinking beer, and not in a hospital or rehab facility like you told me. For a moment, she said nothing, just stared at the photo. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, she waved her hand dismissively. You don't understand, she said. He's just pretending everything's fine. He's struggling mentally. He's been through so much, and he doesn't know how to cope. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Pretending? Mom, look at him. He's not struggling. He's having the time of his life while you've been lying to me and guilt-tripping me into giving up my honeymoon. Do you think I'm stupid? Her face hardened, and she set down the knife she'd been holding. You have no idea what we're going through, she said, her voice shaking with anger. It's not just about him. This family is drowning in problems, and I didn't know how else to handle it. You wouldn't understand. You're too busy living your perfect little life with Jake. My jaw dropped. My perfect life? Are you serious right now? Jake and I spent 2 years saving every penny for our honeymoon, and you manipulated me into throwing it all away for something that isn't even real. Do you have any idea how betrayed I feel right now? At that moment, my dad walked into the room, his face unreadable. He glanced between us, clearly sensing the tension. What's going on? He asked, his voice quieter than usual. I turned to him, desperate for an ally. Did you know about this? Did you know Mom was lying to me about everything? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the floor, his shoulders slumping. It's complicated, he mumbled. Complicated? I repeated, my voice rising. What's so complicated about lying to your own daughter and asking her to give up everything for a fake sob story? My mom sighed heavily and sat down at the table, rubbing her temples. We needed the money, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. What money? I demanded. What are you talking about? She hesitated, then looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of shame and defiance. Your brother's fine, but we're not. We're drowning in debt. The house, the medical bills from years ago, the loans we've taken out to try and stay afloat, it's all too much. We didn't know what else to do. I stared at her, stunned. So you just made up a story about my brother being in a life-threatening accident? You guilt me into canceling my honeymoon so you could take my money. I didn't want to, she snapped, tears streaming down her face now. But what choice did I have? You wouldn't have helped if I told you the truth. You're always so focused on your own life. You don't see what's happening to the rest of us. Her words felt like a slap in the face. Are you kidding me? I said, my voice shaking. I've been there for this family my whole life. I've sacrificed so much for you. And this is how you repay me? By lying to me and manipulating me? My dad finally spoke up, his voice weak. We didn't mean for it to go this far, he said. Your mom thought it was the only way to get you to listen. We were desperate. Desperate? I repeated, my anger boiling over. Do you know what you've done? You've destroyed my trust in you. I would have helped if you'd been honest with me. But now, I don't know if I'll ever be able to believe another word that comes out of your mouth. My mom started sobbing, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I was too angry, too hurt to care. I stood there for a moment, looking at the people who were supposed to be my family, and felt like I didn't even know them anymore. I'm done, I said finally. I'm done being the one who always sacrifices for this family, while you take advantage of me. I'm not giving you another dime. and I'm cutting you off until you can prove you deserve to be in my life." My mom gasped, her face crumpling. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said firmly. "You made your choices, and now I'm making mine." I turned and walked out the door, ignoring their pleas for me to stay. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I had finally stood up for myself, but at the cost of my relationship with my parents. When I got home, Jake was waiting for me, and I collapsed into his arms, finally letting myself cry. "It's over," I said through my tears. I confronted them, and they admitted everything. He held me tightly, whispering words of comfort. "You did the right thing," he said, "and you're not alone. We'll get through this together." And for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Hearing my mom admit the truth was like having the rug yanked out from under me. "We didn't think you'd help if you knew," she had said, her voice thick with tears. I stood there, staring at her, trying to process the weight of her words. My chest tightened as the full reality sank in. They hadn't trusted me enough to be honest. Instead, they'd spun an elaborate lie, complete with fake injuries and guilt-ridden pleas, all to manipulate me into giving up something I'd worked so hard for. "What the hell, Mom?" I finally managed, my voice shaking. "You thought I wouldn't help you if you told me the truth? Do you even hear yourself right now? You lied to me about my brother being in a life-threatening accident. Do you understand how sick that is?" She didn't answer right away. She was too busy sobbing into her hands, a crumpled mess at the kitchen table. My dad, who had been sitting silently during the entire confrontation, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but still refused to meet my eyes. "Why?" I demanded, slamming my hands down on the table. "Why didn't you just tell me you were struggling? You didn't even give me a chance to say yes or no." My mom lifted her tear-streaked face, her expression a mix of shame and defensiveness. "Because you've changed," she said, her voice trembling. "Ever since you moved in with Jake, you've been so focused on your own life. You don't call as much, you don't visit as much. We didn't think you cared anymore." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. "So this is my fault now?" I shot back. "Because I have my own life and priorities. You decided the best way to fix that was to manipulate me with some elaborate lie." "It wasn't like that," she protested weakly. "We were desperate. We didn't know what else to do. You could have asked me," I said through gritted teeth. "You could have sat me down like an adult and explained the situation. I would have listened. I might have even helped. But now, you've destroyed my trust. How do you come back from that?" My dad finally spoke up, his voice low and hesitant. "We didn't want to burden you," he said, as though that was some kind of justification. "You've worked so hard for your honeymoon, and we thought you'd say no. So you decided to take the choice away from me?" I snapped. "You decided it was okay to lie to me and manipulate me into sacrificing everything I've worked for because you were too scared to be honest?" Neither of them answered. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by my mom's occasional sniffles. I turned to my dad, desperate for some kind of accountability. "And you just went along with this? You didn't try to stop her?" He looked at me with tired eyes. "I didn't think it would go this far," he admitted. "But once it started, it was too late to take it back." "Unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head. I left the house shortly after, too angry to stay another second. When I got home, Jake was waiting for me, his expression tense. "How did it go?" he asked cautiously. "They admitted everything," I said, collapsing onto the couch. "The whole thing was a lie. My brother's fine. The accident, the hospital bills, the rehab, it was all fake. They just needed money and didn't think I'd help if they told me the truth." Jake's jaw tightened. "That's disgusting," he said, sitting beside me. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this. I can't wrap my head around it," I said, my voice breaking. "They didn't even give me a chance to say yes or no. They just decided I couldn't be trusted to care enough to help them." Jake pulled me into a hug, holding me tightly. "You're not responsible for their decisions," he said firmly. "They're the ones who lied, not you. Don't let them guilt you into thinking otherwise." Over the next few days, I found myself replaying the confrontation in my head over and over. I wanted to believe that my parents were genuinely desperate, that they had made a terrible mistake out of fear and panic. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. They hadn't just lied, they had betrayed me. They had used my love for my family as a weapon against me, knowing exactly how to push my buttons and manipulate my emotions. Jake tried to help me process my feelings, but it was hard. "You have every right to be angry," he said one night as we lay in bed. "But don't let this destroy you. You can set boundaries without letting their actions dictate your happiness." He was right, of course. But setting boundaries with people you've trusted your entire life is easier said than done. A few days later, I got a text from my mom. Can we talk? Please. I stared at the message for a long time before finally replying. What's left to say? She called me within minutes, her voice shaking. I just want to apologize, she said. I know we hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for what we did. I don't know how to fix this. You can't, I said bluntly. You can't undo the damage you've done. I can't trust you anymore, Mom. How do I know this won't happen again the next time you need something from me? She started crying again, but I didn't feel the usual pang of guilt. For once, I let her tears wash over me without taking responsibility for them. I need space, I said finally. I'm not ready to forgive you, and I don't know if I ever will. Please respect that. After hanging up, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal. But I also felt something else: freedom. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking back control of my life. Jake and I decided to rebook our honeymoon for later in the year. It wasn't the original trip we'd planned, but it was ours, and that was enough. As for my family, I wasn't sure what the future held. But one thing was clear: I was done being their scapegoat. From now on, I was putting myself first. After everything I discovered and endured, I knew the only way forward was to confront my parents one last time and make my boundaries clear. The days leading up to the confrontation were a blur of anxiety and preparation. Jake helped me rehearse what I wanted to say, encouraging me to focus on facts and hold firm against the inevitable guilt tripping. You've done more than enough for them, he reminded me over coffee one morning. It's not selfish to say no to manipulation. You deserve to stand up for yourself. I nodded, though the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. Deep down, I knew he was right. But confronting your own family, people you've trusted and loved your whole life, was harder than I'd ever imagined. When I arrived at my parents' house, my mom greeted me at the door with a strained smile. I'm glad you're here, she said, stepping aside to let me in. I'm here to talk, I said bluntly, not returning her smile. But this isn't going to be an easy conversation. My dad was sitting in the living room, watching TV. When he saw me, he quickly turned it off and sat up straighter, as if bracing himself. Hey, kiddo, he said cautiously. I took a deep breath and sat down across from them. I've thought a lot about everything that's happened, I began, and I need to make some things clear. My mom immediately launched into another teary apology. We were desperate, she said, her voice cracking. We didn't mean to hurt you. We didn't know what else to do. I held up a hand to stop her. I get that you were desperate, I said, but that doesn't justify what you did. You didn't trust me enough to be honest. Instead, you lied to me, manipulated me, and used my love for this family to take advantage of me. That's not okay. My dad spoke up next, his tone defensive. It wasn't just about the money, he said. We were scared, okay? We've been drowning in debt, and we didn't want to burden you with all of that. You didn't want to burden me? I repeated, my voice rising. Do you hear yourselves? You created this elaborate lie about my brother being in a life-threatening accident. You made me believe he was on the brink of death. How is that any less of a burden? My mom wiped at her eyes, but I pressed on, refusing to let her tears derail me. I canceled my honeymoon for you, I continued, my voice trembling with emotion. I gave up something Jake and I worked so hard for because I thought my brother's life was in danger. And the whole time, you knew it was a lie. We didn't think you'd help if we told you the truth, my mom said softly. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me once again. That's what hurts the most, I said. You didn't even give me a chance. You just assumed I wouldn't care, and instead of asking for my help, you manipulated me into giving it. The room fell silent for a moment. My parents exchanged a glance, and I could see the weight of my words sinking in. But then my mom's expression hardened, and she leaned forward. You're right, she said, her voice trembling with both anger and desperation. We made a mistake. But don't you think you're being a little selfish? You're abandoning your family over one mistake. Is your honeymoon really more important than helping us keep this family together? I felt my blood boil. This isn't about the honeymoon, I said sharply. This is about trust. You broke mine. You lied to me, manipulated me, and then blamed me for not being around enough to notice you were struggling. That's not fair, and it's not my responsibility to fix the mess you created. My mom's face crumpled again, but I didn't let it affect me this time. I had spent too many sleepless nights crying over this. It was time to put myself first. I'm not giving you a dime, I said firmly, and I'm not going to let you guilt me into changing my mind. If you want my help, you'll have to earn my trust back. That means being honest with me from now on. No more lies. No more manipulation. Until then, I need space. My dad nodded slowly, looking more resigned than upset. But my mom was still bristling, her tears replaced by a look of defiance. Fine, she said, her voice tight. Do whatever you want. But don't come crying to us when you need help someday. I stood up, my heart pounding. You're right. I will do whatever I want. Because I'm done letting you control me with guilt and lies. From now on, I'm living my life on my terms. With that, I turned and walked out the door, refusing to look back. When I got home, Jake was waiting for me, as he always was. He took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. How do you feel? He asked gently. Free, I said, surprising myself with the answer. I feel free. He smiled and kissed my forehead. I'm proud of you, he said. That night, we sat down and finalized the details of our new honeymoon plans. We decided to keep it simple, something local but meaningful. It wasn't the trip we had originally dreamed of, but it was ours, and that was enough. As for my parents, I stuck to my word and cut contact with them. At first, it was hard. There were days when I wanted to call and make amends, but Jake reminded me that it was okay to prioritize my own well-being. Over time, I realized just how much their manipulation had affected me. I had spent so much of my life putting their needs above my own, sacrificing my happiness to keep the peace. But this experience taught me that I didn't have to live that way anymore. Setting boundaries was hard, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I felt like I had control over my own life. And while I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with my parents, I knew one thing for sure. I would never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. The day Jake and I finally boarded the plane for our rescheduled honeymoon, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The original trip we'd planned had been replaced with something a bit simpler. A coastal getaway filled with small-town charm, peaceful beaches, and plenty of time to reconnect. As we settled into our seats, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. The last few weeks had been emotionally draining, to say the least. Confronting my parents, cutting off contact, and coming to terms with their betrayal had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But as the plane took off, leaving the chaos behind, I realized I finally felt free. The honeymoon was everything I needed. Jake and I spent our days exploring charming little towns, eating incredible food, and laughing until our sides hurt. We left our phones in the hotel room, most of the time, avoiding the outside world and all its drama. For the first time in years, I felt completely untethered from my family's constant demands and manipulations. One night, as we sat on the beach watching the sunset, Jake turned to me and said, "You're different now, you know." I glanced at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "You're lighter," he said with a soft smile. "It's like you finally let go of all the weight you've been carrying for so long. I'm proud of you." His words brought tears to my eyes. He was right. I did feel lighter. For the first time in a long time, I was living for myself instead of constantly trying to please everyone else. "This trip feels like a fresh start," I said, leaning against him. "And it is," he replied. When we returned home, I felt a mix of dread and resolve. I knew I couldn't completely avoid the fallout from cutting off my parents, but I was determined to protect the peace I'd found on our honeymoon. Over the following weeks, I kept my distance from my family. My mom tried to reach out a few times, sending long, guilt-ridden texts about how much she missed me and how family is all that matters. I ignored them. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't going to let her pull me back into the cycle of manipulation. My dad stayed quiet, which didn't surprise me. He had always been more of a bystander in the chaos, letting my mom take the lead. While I was still angry with him for enabling her lies, I didn't feel the same level of betrayal. My brother, on the other hand, was a different story. One evening, I got a call from him out of the blue. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "Hey," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. There was a long pause before he finally said, "Look, I just wanted to apologize." "For what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "For going along with Mom's lie," he admitted. I didn't think it would get so out of hand, and by the time I realized how far it had gone, I didn't know how to stop it. I let out a bitter laugh. "You could have stopped it by telling me the truth." "I know," he said quickly. "And I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I should have spoken up sooner." His apology felt genuine, but it didn't erase the damage that had been done. "I appreciate you saying that," I said after a moment. "But it's going to take time for me to trust you again." "I understand," he said quietly. Since that conversation, my relationship with my brother has been tentative. We talk occasionally, but it's clear that things aren't the same. The bond we once had feels fractured, and I don't know if it will ever fully heal. As for my parents, I've maintained my boundaries. I haven't spoken to them directly since the confrontation, and while it's been difficult, it's also been liberating. I've finally realized that loving someone doesn't mean letting them take advantage of you. Looking back on everything, I'm glad I trusted my instincts. If I had let guilt override my intuition, I would have given up my honeymoon and my peace of mind for a lie. The experience taught me an important lesson. Sometimes, even family can betray you. But that doesn't mean you have to let them control your life. Now, I'm focusing on building a future with Jake. A future filled with love, trust, and mutual respect. I don't know what role my family will play in that future, but for the first time, I'm okay with not having all the answers. What I do know is this. I deserve to be happy, and I deserve to be surrounded by people who value and respect me. And no matter what happens, I'll never let anyone take that away from me again.